Necrozma was once a brilliant being known throughout Ultra Space as the Blinding One. Its light has spread throughout the multiverse to change the worlds of countless creatures. For some, like Poipole, it granted a lush and vibrant planet. For Alola, it gave Z power and Z crystals to their region. It even gave Alolan Exeggutor its unique regional form. But what about the worlds of all the other Ultra Beasts? How did this blinding son of a creature create the worlds of the Ultra Beasts who now dominate their environments? Well, I'm about to answer all of this and more today as I bring to you Necrozma and the Ecology of Ultra Space. Howdy there, I'm Krillic, and we have a big one today because we're basically talking about the ecology of Ultra Space in its full glory. But before we can even get into answering all these different questions that I've given you, we need to figure out what's exactly going on with Necrozma, how it functions, how it affects Alola, and why it is vital to the multiverse because its lore gets a little bit messy. Necrozma itself once had a beautiful form composed mostly of pure light. It was a being that spread light throughout Ultra Space, but that light was also so powerful that it spread further through the Ultra wormholes it created and into universes unknown. This body of light is supported by a sort of skeleton made from the various pieces of Necrozma's crystalline body, the pieces that we see in its weakened, blackened form. These pieces now take on a golden glow from the light, but they return to black if it runs out of power. The patterns we see in its eyes also resemble the Ultra Necrozmium Z. It is understood that Necrozma is not only the source of Z power, but is also the original source of the Z crystals. Now, when its body was damaged or weakened, these crystals spread from its body and throughout the universe. Though we don't see it in other universes, we at least see these crystals within Alola, and we'll come back to how this has changed Alola later on, because without Necrozma, the entire region would change massively. Now, Necrozma is at full power when it's in this Ultra form, radiating energy that has all sorts of effects on living things and even nature itself. By all technicality, it is even stated by Kazumasa Iwao, game designer and director who has been working on Pokemon since Black and White, who stated the following: as a result, and even though it really only needed a small amount of energy, Necrozma comes to gain a huge amount of energy, beyond what Necrozma itself anticipated, when it captures Solgaleo or Lunala. And because of this excessive amount of energy, Necrozma goes berserk. Though, when it catches both of them, or it is refilled with enough Z power, as we see in the anime, it returns to this massive ultra-powered version of itself anyway, its true form that it bears control over. This will go even further to be stated that Necrozma and the two legendary Pokemon, Solgaleo and Lunala, have a give and take relationship with each other, fueling each other over time. But how do we explain this? Well, if Ultra Necrozma spreads light throughout the multiverse, then it only seems like the simplest answer is that this helps Cosmog and Cosmoem, creatures that we question as per their status of Ultra Beast or not, but whether they are or aren't is effectively irrelevant, because at the end of the day, all Ultra Beasts are Pokemon, because they can all be caught in Pokeballs and not just Beast Balls. It's just more difficult. Now, as Cosmog and Cosmoem grow, they should eventually evolve into Solgaleo or Lunala. But there's a problem here, because at least within our time, Ultra Necrozma was damaged, and again, the only way to restore itself from its Necrozma state is to absorb them or to get blasted with enough Z energy. The problem is that Necrozma simply seeks to absorb light to restore itself. It is in incredible amounts of pain, meaning that it is desperate and will attack and absorb all sources of light while also taking the legendary Pokemon's lives as it fuses with them like a parasite and begins to control them. So their only safe bet is to drop off Cosmog safely into places they deem fit. Alola was one of these places, and to ensure the Cosmog we would eventually learn to call Nebi, the two legendaries would battle and defeat the 4 Tapus of the 4 islands, forcing them into becoming over-glorified babysitters. I also have a small theory that I'm still working on, which involves the fall of the entire kingdom of Alola, which there were kings. We actually get to learn that Acerola is the last living member of the, royal family line, and when we look at the history of Hawaii, and we even look at the history of the 4 Tapus, there was a war in Alola. I'm thinking it may have involved the Tapus and Lunala and Solgaleo, but again, I'm still working on all of that. Ultimately though, these decisions are for more than just saving their children, but to continue their lineage. Naturally, like deer to wolves, these Pokemon understand that they will be hunted and consumed by Necrozma, who will then continue the cycle of life.
Despite this, within the anime and the games, through the understanding that Solgaleo and Lunala should not be absorbed by Necrozma because it's too much light, it's actually shown that they should be helping restore Necrozma to its full power by giving it light, explaining why it needs them to reach this point, but because it's so damaged, it's desperate and tries to absorb them instead, like a wounded animal desperate to escape the corner that it's been put into.
Now, continuing with Ultra Necrozma, its body temperature exceeds 10,000 degrees Fahrenheit, 5,540 Celsius. Anything that touches it will melt from the extreme heat. It can fire laser beams from every part of its body, burning through everything in its path over 18 miles away. Now, the first thing we're going to talk about is that its body temperature exceeds 10,000 degrees Fahrenheit. This puts it as hotter than the surface of the sun. And I don't know how they got this information without dying, since anything that touches it melts from extreme heat, but something tells me that its core is gonna be hotter than even that temperature rating. It does radiate light from all around those concentrated beams, and it's stated to only travel 18 miles away, but when you can create a wormhole immediately in front of you and creates an exit wormhole everywhere else and anywhere else, distance is pretty irrelevant, I'd say. Plus, when you shoot a beam, it's going to spread out more and more and more, so that's also going to be part of it. Maybe the most concentrated and deadliest part of the beam is only going to go 18 miles, meanwhile the rest of the light goes a further distance. Either way, if Ultra Necrozma really wanted to, it could open up a wormhole right above you and blast its beams over you point blank, no matter where you are. Or alternatively, it could open a wormhole miles and miles above a certain region, and again, the light then cascades without harm over said region. This would basically be no different than us being so far away or far enough away from the sun for then Earth to support life on it. Now take this idea and imagine the various distances that Necrozma's light spreads out to. How far or how close to the light these worlds are, and how the light from a supermassive psychic dragon, rather than a ball of chemical reactions, would affect everything that much further or differently in general. Further with Necrozma's information, while swinging its four wings around, Ultra Necrozma uses its superheated claws to tear its opponents to shreds. As seen in the prism between light and darkness, when Ultra Necrozma uses up all its light, it reverts to its lightless form and enters into a deep slumber unless it absorbs more light. Ultimately then, it is important to understand that Ultra Necrozma is effectively the sun at the end of the day, which is made even clearer by its signature move, Light That Burns the Sky, which if you burn ozone, it's effectively quote-unquote burning the sky. It definitely represents more, but we're focusing on it as representation of the sun, and at the end of the day, the sun is unlikely to just explode, despite that being a common joke that even I've said before. Rather, it will just reach a maximum where it is no longer able to continue its chemical reactions at an increasing rate, and then slowly peter out over a stretch of time incomprehensible to us. Right now, it's a big yellow ball in the sky to us, much like Ultra Necrozma, and just the same, when it does die out, it will become no more than a white dwarf, pale and hardly emitting life, or light rather, until it completely dies out, which we can see reflected in the pale bluish form of Ultra Necrozma's shiny form. Unfortunately, Ultra Necrozma being a living creature didn't just peter out, depending on the lore. In the games, it's left a little ambiguous, but maybe it did just die out. But depending on whether you look at the anime or manga, we get two different stories. In the manga, the people of Ultra Megalopolis attacked it. In the anime, it protected the planet of Poipole and Naganadel, only to get crashed into by a meteor and become severely damaged, falling into its corrupted form. And as a side note, this is effectively the exact same thing that happens to Arceus in the movie Arceus and the Jewel of Life. The difference is that Arceus loses its plates momentarily, and Necrozma loses pieces of itself. But in both scenarios, they are in danger of dying and are in incredible amounts of pain. Also, the Z crystals can't allow Arceus to change its forms, if I remember correctly, so they're not related in that sense. Back on track though, because of this event within the anime, we see how Poipole and Aganadel's world falls to decay. The plants wither, the world starts becoming devoid of life without Ultra Necrozma's light, and so, let's begin here. This is an unnamed world that does not appear within any other form of media, so it might not even be canonical to any other version of Pokemon. But to be entirely fair, until we do see something like this within the games that contradicts this, then it's fair game to me, as it doesn't mess with any other form of lore. Plus, this is all theorizing and speculation in the end, so let's have some fun today, huh? As stated, without Ultra Necrozma, this place loses all of its plant life, which of course destroys the ecosystem. This further shows how Ultra Necrozma is meant to represent the sun, as its light brings more than just warmth, but also brings genuine waves of light that are used for photosynthesis. We don't get to see any other forms of Ultra Beasts on this world, with the exception of our purple poison dragon friends. But in a world full of flowers, it's no surprise that we would find a large bee thriving and making large nests here. And let me tell you, they make an incredibly large nest that humans can walk through. And it's also where we see one Naganadel with plenty of Poipole, brood mother. This is because Poipole itself is of course inspired by bee larvae, so we get Queen Naganadel in these lands. But how exactly did they come into existence? We know that they're also the equivalent of Ultra Megalopolis's starter Pokemon, which makes way more sense now when we consider that starter Pokemon are incredibly rare or otherwise non-existent in the wild where humans frequent. Instead, we find them being raised by specialized people, or they are far away from society in places like the Lentil region within Pokemon Snap. So considering this planet may very well be the only home of the Poipole species, and future homes of Ultra Beasts we talk about may also be the places where they are strictly endemic to. Now, we could try and figure out which Pokemon were turned into each of the Ultra Beasts, but to do that would mean that we'd be playing a bigger guessing game and making a lot of assumptions. Instead, it's better to assume that they were never mutations of Pokemon that originally existed, and yes, if you're thinking of the Guzzlord theory that I've talked about in other videos, we'll deal with that later, don't worry. For now, it seems like these Ultra Beasts would become the dominant species just by the sheer number of flowers and overall flora that we would find here. But a strange detail is that Poipole is able to spray two different mixtures from its needle. It could just spray a harmless substance that it uses to paint, or it can spray out an adhesive poison. It's also made clear in their concept art that their eyes and mouth are illuminated, blue in color. This leads me to believe that within the games, their world wasn't saved, and they adapted this blue glow over time, much like the people of Ultra Megalopolis developed blue skin from a lack of sunlight. As for their sprays, the colored spray could serve to not only mark their territories, but could also bring color back to an otherwise fading world, which is a little bit sad. But why did they develop, on top of that, an adhesive poison? Also, they spin around like a paint mixer, I just realized. Either way, what creatures would it be attacking when its entire species is known to be resistant to those very same poisons, or even acids? Especially when we get into Naganadel, who can shoot the adhesive a total distance of 6 miles. Well, this is when it gets a little tricky, because the only technically contradicting bit of information is once again that these Ultra Beasts live in Ultra Megalopolis, which could mean one very interesting outcome. Naganadel's world may have been re-inhabited by humanity, which would explain these similar dark environments, the poisonous offensive abilities, and maybe even how the recon squad we are aware of and Megalopolis doesn't really exist within the anime. Instead, we get Aether Paradise's own exploration squad, and then within the games, we're just told that Poipole and Naganadel reside in Megalopolis. Whatever few signs we have seem to point to the idea that both worlds, Naganadel's and Megalopolis, are one and the same, transformed from nature into an urban, or rather city, environment, much like what we see in the real world. Honestly, it would even explain how the people of that city are even able to get pigmentation for their clothes or any items that they use. Poipole provides it, because otherwise what plants do they have since they've made it clear that they don't have a sun? Obviously, they have to have some sort of oxygen available or nobody would be alive, but how that's being done is questionable, and the only logical explanation is that there are plants growing without the need for sunlight. One example could be green algae that uses redox reactions, or other plants that absorb different wavelengths of light and don't necessarily need direct traditional sunlight. Probably a mix, to be honest, but all of that is neither here nor there. Let's briefly move on to Ultra Space itself before we dig into Alola. Also, I will say right now, I'm not really covering Ultra Wilds. There's not a ton of information there, and they just kind of represent the infinite number of realities. Now, after that, then, we will move on to all the other worlds within Ultra Space. Now, this space in general, Ultra Space, is incredibly strange, but is effectively what seems like the central hub between all the different dimensions. There are two things that we find here. One is Cosmog itself. The other would be these massive crystalline meteoroids, or meteors. With Cosmog, it makes sense that we would find it here. It's a creature that eats space dust, can open ultra wormholes, and will gain density more and more until it eventually turns into Cosmoem, and then further absorbs enough light to transform into Solgaleo or Lunala, or just even more space dust. Their existence within this space between dimensions is a pretty great place to stay safe and separated from any other form of threatening life that might exist, until Ultra Necrozma lost its power. Now, no matter what, we have the understanding that Ultra Necrozma effectively shattered in some way, and that's how we got the Z crystals. But what about all the crystals within this space? What about the rest of its body? Well, that's exactly what these meteors just might be. The shattered remnants of what once were, or was, the original Ultra Necrozma. Now, I never would have come across this or came to this conclusion as a possibility were not for Keyskem, who I read some articles from regarding some deep scrapped lore of the Pokemon games, so if you want more on that idea, go check out the trio of videos regarding that and the Hidden War and Lost Giants. What this could then mean, though, is that these crystals could be landing in more spaces than just Alola, and even within Alola, there could be new crystals constantly appearing over the years. We know there's tons of them because we even get to see a case full of Buginium Z crystals in Guzma's room after we defeat him, let alone all the crystals that are given out to people as part of the trials. Looking at Alola as a whole now, there are a lot of massive changes that Necrozma has caused that makes Alola incredibly unique. Let's just begin with the environment itself, and I do have a whole video on Alola's ecology, so don't worry, we're going to kind of do a flyover here. We've already explained, though, here, how Ultra Necrozma's light travels through multiverses, but there's something that's incredibly strange about it. Why is it that Alola is perfectly fine and full of Necrozma's power even though it's been damaged? And the result is a bit complicated. For one, if the sun just poofed away from existence right now, then it's estimated that we'd have less than 10 minutes before we'd no longer have light from it. But in the case of Necrozma, its light is more than just light. It is full of its own unique energy that then infuses with Alola itself. This energy is what gives the Tapus their power as they draw upon nature itself, their own incredible powers and signature moves, but the clearest sign that this is the case is when we look at their collective signature move, Guardian of Alola. The description of it is as follows. The user, the land spirit Pokemon, obtains Alola's energy using its Z power and attacks the target with full force. Of course, we understand that the individual Pokemon's Z power is just what they have been instilled with, the energy that they have absorbed from being an Alola, and with the help of their trainer as a regulating device, and the Z Crystal as a catalyst, all very similar to how Mega Stones work, it can unleash this Z move. In other words, everything continues to relate back to Necrozma. What this means then is that without the light of Necrozma or its crystals, the Tapus would then lose their power, which we do see in the anime. But you might then say, hey Krillic, their powers are tied to nature too, aren't they? And I answer that question with, what is nature? What do you consider nature? Nature is just the ecosystem itself. It is ecology. It is a complete cycle in its purity, a thing that just is a concept and has come to function as a collective. And what would Alola be without the light of Necrozma? What would nature be without its light? Well, we actually do have an answer for that, but we'll get to that later. If you really wanted to be thorough about this, we could dig into the fact that even Zygarde came to Alola to rebuild its power, and inherently it gained what is recognized as a Z move of its own within Legends ZA. The effective god of ecology absorbed Z power into itself without an issue, and then used it as its own power. So with the understanding that Z power is inherently part of Alola's ecology and nature, we can talk briefly about how that has further changed flora within the world. Because not only do Alolans have a very intimate connection with nature, but when we look at each of the major totem battle locations, we begin to see a much deeper effect on the flora and the fauna. The lush caves that contain either a totem Gumshoos or a totem Alolan Raticate make their home here. And while in the games it just seems like a basic trial, it's far more than just that. Yungoos and Gumshoos were brought into Alola in order to cull the invasive population of Rattata, only for said Rattata to become nocturnal in order to escape predation. But this all goes further when either one of them, which depends on whether you're in the Sun or Moon universe, becomes the totem Pokemon thanks to one of Necrozma's Z crystals. Anytime we get a totem Pokemon, they become imbued with so much power that they gain a form of gigantism. We see this time and time again within the franchise, whether we are looking at colossal Pokemon in Paldea, rogue Megas and Lumios, and of course Dynamax power within Galar. Each of these separate forms of energy are naturally occurring within the world. With totem Pokemon, we know they become stronger, and in fact, they basically become boss or leader Pokemon in their own right, which, when they are translated directly, their name isn't totem, but rather leader Pokemon. These Pokemon effectively create a monoculture where only their own species thrive within a select area. Alternatively though, they do create an ecosystem that allows others to thrive alongside them. In the case of Gumshoos and Alolan Raticate, they are both invasive species that have complete control over the verdant cavern. They only call for help from the same species, and after we deal with them, then we start to see other Pokemon returning to the area. Also, just to explain things a little bit better, you might know that Rattata in Alola is an invasive species, but the whole idea of the Yungoos population being brought in is related to the Indian mongoose being brought into Hawaii, which ended up not actually attacking the mice that had gotten into Hawaii, because mice were also nocturnal and people just did not do their due diligence, and so they not only had one invasive species, but they had two now, thanks to human intervention. Plus, there's so many other invasives that have gotten their way into Hawaii. It is pretty awful. Not to keep plugging other videos, but I have a whole video on invasive species if you want to know the full story of that and a lot more. Back on track, this is once again simply just because they are stronger and can outcompete every single other species. Meanwhile, when we look at other locations, such as with the Totem Lurantis within Lush Jungle, it summons Pokemon such as Castform and Trumbeak, each of them having a massive positive effect on the jungle. In Castform's case, it has the ability to use Sunny Day, so each of the plants and plant-based Pokemon can grow and thrive, while Trumbeak spreads seeds throughout the jungle with its own attacks. Meanwhile, Lurantis, as a bug Pokemon, is a huge target for Pokemon that might eat plants, but only then get their population controlled as Lurantis strikes back at them. These additional effects from the Pokemon become fairly separate from Necrozma beyond creating the totem Pokemon, and then the actions of the totem Pokemon themselves is a deeper result. So I won't be going over all of that, but long story short, any environment controlled by a totem Pokemon is one that is a direct result of Necrozma shattering. Verdant Cavern, Brooklet Hill with either Wishy-Washy or Araquanid, Lush Jungle, the thrifty Megamart technically with Mimikyu, and Komo'o at Vast Pony Canyon. The rest of the totem Pokemon are still guardian leaders, but they aren't changing the environment in ways that we are made aware of. So instead of continuing on about totems and Alola itself, we instead have one more Pokemon to talk about before we dig into all the Ultra Space environments, and let's get to it. Within Alola, we get Alolan Exeggutor, no duh, one of many regional variants that we've been blessed with, but there's something very strange about it, because there are other Alolan regionals like Sandslash and Raichu in places like the Lentil region, yet we don't get to see them anywhere else, and we don't see an Alolan Exeggutor there. You might consider Blueberry Academy's Terrarium, but if you try to evolve a Pokemon into their regional variant forms, they just turn into their traditional forms. Meaning these Alolan Exeggutor may have been imported alongside many other Pokemon as we would expect from the Terrarium. As a side, I really should probably make some deep dives on the Terrarium and the Safari Zones of Pokemon. It would tell us a lot about the Pokemon we never get to see in the wild and how good these places actually are. Now back to Alolan Exeggutor, it is stated that due to the abundance of sunlight in the Alola region, the Exeggutor that live there grow over 5 times taller than those in other regions. The region is considered to be the best environment for it, and there are even ancient carvings that depict it in this form within Alola. To me, it seems like too much of a coincidence that it talks about an abundance of light, which we know comes from Necrozma, who, when it is in its true form, is a psychic dragon Pokemon. Meanwhile, Alolan Exeggutor loses its psychic typing and becomes a grass dragon type Pokemon. Once again, it seems like this is easily attributable to it absorbing the natural energy of Alola, and of course, the powerful light from Necrozma itself, which, again, are theoretically the same thing at the end of the day. What's even more interesting and feels like a final piece of the puzzle to confirm this is that when we try to evolve any Pokemon in any of the Ultra Space locations, they don't evolve into their Alolan forms. Even more specifically, even if we take them to Ultra Ruins, which is a confirmed alternate reality to Alola, they still do not evolve into their Alolan forms, meaning that it has to have Alola and Necrozma's light mixed together in order to create Alolan Exeggutor. This finally leads us to talking about the rest of the Ultra Beasts and their home worlds, including Guzzlord and Ultra Ruin. But there's still a bit of a catch here, because this is not the home of Guzzlord and is instead one of the many assumed places that it lands in. To explain the destitute state of the Ultra Ruin, there are a number of hints all around the lands that tell us a complete story as to what happened here, because it really wasn't Guzzlord that destroyed the lands, water, and skies, but rather humanity itself. The story reveals itself when we find out there were flyers that advertised a power plant being built in the area, much like the power plants we see in Kanto, which is then shown further within the manga to have caused a great amount of destruction and potentially have killed a lot of Pokemon due to its pollution. When we pair this with knowing that Alola was once a place littered with garbage, as shown through the need for them to import Grimer to consume the excess hordes of Trubbish and Garbodor, then we get a great understanding of how humanity ruined nature overall. The Alolans of Ultra Ruin would destroy nature more and more over time, and while it is stated at one point there were people who were against the construction of the power plant, it was too late, and it was not only being built, but it would further pollute Alola as a whole. Eventually, the blue of the water and of the sky would fade away to nothing, likely being turned to murky brown water and a smog-filled sky. This in turn would blot out the sun and the excess light from Necrozma, reducing Z-powers, slowly destroying nature and the ecosystem, and eventually leave the Tapus with little to no power. The only one we are made aware of even existing being the fated Tapu Koko in the anime, who brings Ash in the anime to this world, to this Ultra Ruin, with the help of the Koko from his universe. But at some point, the Junkivore Pokemon Guzzlord would arrive via Ultra Wormhole. Now, it's important to know that Guzzlord cannot open wormholes on its own. In fact, other than Solgaleo, Lunala, and Necrozma, the only one capable of opening an Ultra Wormhole seems to be Kartana, who cut a hole in space-time to achieve this. Otherwise, all of our other Ultra Beasts just land wherever they do, sucked through these Ultra Wormholes and thrown down in the middle of nowhere, confused, scared, and looking to defend themselves and return home. Now, when we look at Guzzlord, it is the perfect Pokemon for consuming anything and everything. Whatever it eats is completely metabolized into itself as it grows larger and does not create any form of waste whatsoever, unlike other Pokemon. And, for clarification, yes, that means it does not use the bathroom at all, unlike other Pokemon. But Guzzlord takes this even further with its ability to consume literally anything. It can use its powers to make anything float towards it or suck it in so it can consume it, including the rivers and the mountains, and of course, air itself, meaning that everything that exists can be consumed. But in a world like Ultra Ruin, is that actually a bad thing? Is it bad to completely erase something that has been thoroughly poisoned and tainted, that if it was left alone, it would only further infect and destroy everything else around it? It's almost like excising a cancerous tumor from the world when Guzzlord eats this ruined region, which is exactly what it's doing. This leads us to another important question.
how did Guzzlord have the sheer luck and chance to fall onto Ultra Ruin, a place in need of a creature like it when there are no other Pokemon there like Swalot to consume the sheer waste that exists at all? Well, that's the trick. It wasn't luck. It was entirely planned by Necrozma. Whereas the many Ultra Beasts that land in Alola during the events of the game are accidental and caused by Necrozma going wild before attaining its Ultra form, the Guzzlord in Ultra Ruin was a purposeful placement. Many people will claim that Zygarde was corrupted and transformed into Guzzlord, all thanks to their similarities, but we can effectively prove this wrong. Now, take what I'm about to say with a bit of a grain of salt, because there were leaks that did give us a little bit of info and said that Zygarde came to Alola not only as a response to the oncoming threats of the Ultra Beasts, which we also see in the manga, but also because it was supposed to fight against Guzzlord specifically in a post-game event, which would allow you to complete the story that results in you gaining a Zygarde of your own, rather than just finding or getting one gifted to you. After all, the two of them serve as perfect foils to each other. But again, grain of salt to that, at least again within the manga, we do get some exemplification of that. But then if this isn't the home of Guzzlord, then what is our next question. Well, let's try and break it down by its traits, just like we did with Poipole and Naganadel, to figure that out. It has two faces, with the one on the body being the one it uses to eat, while the secondary one at top has no mouth but is the weak point, likely meaning that it holds the brain. In addition, the body is similar to that of rubber, which we see developed in Pokemon like the Mareepline, so they don't get shocked by their own electricity. But Guzzlord is a dark dragon type, so why would it have developed that? Well, it might actually be in response to ruined worlds just like Ultra Ruin, because when the world starts to get violently polluted, then we get some incredibly nasty storms, meaning it is able to take some incredible impacts from lightning, more than what your typical dragon Pokemon might be able to take. In addition, it allows its body to be more elastic, to be able to bounce strikes at it off and flying debris away. And of course, the elasticity of the body could also be playing into its body being able to expand as it eats. Its perfect ability to just consume and process it is exactly as we've discussed, a way to rid the world of its filth permanently. If everything it is eating is destroyed, ruined, and infectious, then there's no reason to urinate or defecate it all back into the world in a worse, more compact way like we would see with other Pokemon like Weezing or even Muk. Just get rid of it completely, which effectively makes Guzzlord the hero of our story as long as it doesn't get dumped into a place that doesn't need to be cleaned and it ends up killing, let's say the first faller we've never actually been aware of regarding their name. But once again, this still doesn't tell us what Necrozma did to create this junk of ore and what its home is like. And the only answer is that Guzzlord must have developed in a world of pure junk. That much like the theory that Zygarde was transformed into one of these, that something must have turned into it in a destroyed world, becoming a creature that would eat the planet that it resides on and effectively leave nothing left. What evolved into that is effectively irrelevant, because then we could be asking that question about every single other Pokemon pre-Stage 1. After all, though, that's effectively the end goal. If the entire planet is destroyed, then it would just get eaten instead. Then these creatures would be left to float in space forever, which you might think sounds cruel, but it would be incredibly thematic for a creature that not only acts like a black hole, but also represents one in its appetite. It even has a white shiny that could serve as a thematic opposite in the theoretical concept of a white hole. In other words, there is no planet for Guzzlord. They are meant to consume and then float aimlessly until they are needed again or until they die. We really don't know what their lifespan is, but it definitely seems like there would be an incredibly low number of them, or else we'd have a lot of planets being consumed to nothingness and Guzzlords that are the size of entire planets floating around somewhere as though they were their own solar system, and that would be horrifying. Planet Eater Guzzlord coming to us. Actually, you know what? I could see Giovanni having one of those. How about we move on to another Pokemon that we don't actually know the home world of, but can figure out some interesting details about by looking at Blacephalon, and don't worry, I will look at the official art later. There are two incredibly important details regarding Blacephalon and how we can figure out its home world and how it was affected by Necrozma. Because it has the very unique ability to use its head as a firework to distract its targets, and then it steals their vitality, much like any other ghost Pokemon would, it's actually pretty telling.
It also instantly understands what fireworks are within the animated series, meaning that wherever it comes from is a place where fireworks already exist. Either that or the world is completely overrun with Blacephalon, but that doesn't seem likely since it is relying on surprising and consuming vitality from prey. Now, fireworks will work on anything since it's a dazzling display of lights and a loud sound. The problem is that it may also scare the target away, so Blacephalon isn't going to be targeting any creature that's afraid of fireworks, but rather any creature that would be attracted to or in awe of fireworks. Because of this, I would actually like to claim that Blacephalon's homeworld may be similar to our own world, a place where humans have lived and developed fireworks only for a new Pokemon to have come into existence, prepared to take advantage of our own shock and awe. Effectively, I'm just saying Blacephalon is no different than Sinistea. After all, Sinistea just invades moldy cups of tea that people leave out, so who's to say it's not a similar effect, even though Blacephalon is creating its own fireworks, not just possessing a fireworks stand. It's entirely plausible that Necrozma's light resulted in a number of worlds being able to not only sustain strange Ultra Beast life, but also human life. After all, that's why we have the Recon Squad from Ultra Megalopolis. They had to exist somewhere at first. The only additional bit that we could assume is that its world is still vibrant and full of life, where Blacephalon comes from. Otherwise, the bright colors of it would serve not as something to attract prey, but rather as a bright warning for anyone who sees it to run for the hills. And of course, as I will do with any official artwork moving forward, I'll support my claim with the art that they have of it, with rocks, palm trees, and the Ultra Recon Squad alongside what I assume would be someone meant to represent a main character, us, as we will see commonly in each of these pieces. It seems pretty clear that this is just another place, once again, similar to Earth, but it's not Earth, because every single other piece of artwork seems to depict another world, another reality, when we are accompanied by the Ultra Recon Squad, or we just see them with these Ultra Beasts. So this is just one of the many worlds that may actually have had humans in it, or do have humans in it, that an Ultra Beast just lives in, like any other normal Pokemon would. Let's follow this up with a Pokemon that actually serves as a rival to Blacephalon due to its own incredibly flashy behavior, as we talk about Xurkitree and its homeworld, the Ultra Plant.
Editing Krillic here for a third time because I just keep coming up with ideas, and the reason why these two probably fight is because Xurkitree might be seeking mates by being the brightest of its own kind within its own world, meaning that Blacephalon may actually be mistaken by Xurkitree as competition for mating.
The Ultra Plant is a dark world that suffers from frequent lightning strikes from storm clouds that cover the sky. Large monoliths are visible protruding from the surface of the planet. Various sizes of Xurkitree can also be seen in the distance, ranging from regular size 12'6" ones, which is really tall, that the player encounters, to the massive Xurkitree that looms over in the distance that lightning bolts strike at. The two monoliths that the player arrives on to encounter Xurkitree are connected by a giant Xurkitree appendage that glows and wraps around the landing zone, and as lightning strikes down in the area, the appendages light up as well, and smaller Xurkitree can be seen running around the area disconnected from the ground. This world is horrifying. It is nothing but a Xurkitree haven. The ground, the towers, the inhabitants, they are all the same and there is no escaping it. And that is what makes it all that much more horrifying, because it means that there are no other creatures left, guaranteed. This personally makes me think of Jupiter, a planet that has incredibly powerful lightning, unlike what we see here on Earth. The following is part of an article from NASA in May of 2023. New Horizons cameras captured lightning flashes on Jupiter 10 times as powerful as anything ever recorded on Earth. And recently, Juno, flying closer to Jupiter than any previous mission, found that most of Jupiter's lightning is around the planet's higher latitudes, unlike Earth, where lightning strikes primarily over land and most intensely at the equator. Juno detected peak rates of 4 strikes per second, similar to rates on Earth. But the difference we find is that this is a solid planet, rather than a gas giant roiling with storms. We know this for a fact because if Xurkitree ever runs out of electricity, it will just plug itself into the ground to draw energy from it if you wanted to just ignore the rocky monoliths.
This could just be a habit that it developed from living on its much larger family member, but it could also be something that was developed as a method to draw flowing electrons from the planet itself long ago. After all, it still plants itself into the ground within Alola, as we see in the anime. What may have happened is that at some point, just like how our sun can light off a solar flare that disrupts our planet's ozone layer, Necrozma's own solar flare occurred and greatly changed a planet forever. To explain the science a little bit better, the sheer amount of energy being poured towards and impacting with the particles that make up the ozone layer can cause them to separate or cause other chemical changes. Of course, it can also cause electromagnetic changes, but we're not talking about that right now. The scientific community is divided on how much solar activity can or does impact Earth's climate. According to weather.gov, there is evidence that the Earth's climate is sensitive to extremely small variations in the sun's energy output across time scales of tens to hundreds of years. However, these solar flares can influence the ozone layer. Completely draining it would need a never-before-seen storm. Satellite data obtained by Sci-Fi shows that a solar flare in 2000 destroyed around 1% of the overall ozone layer, with most of it in the high atmosphere. Destroy the ozone layer, and we get more heat. We get more changes in weather patterns, hotter summers, wetter winters, stronger storms as the world balances and shifts itself around, and eventually there will be a strong enough storm to wipe out everything. And even without that, we have one instance that happened in the real world that could have kickstarted everything Xurkitree needed in its world to start its takeover. And it may be a partial inspiration for our Ultra Plant, otherwise nicknamed as Ultra Power Plant. Now, the largest thunderstorm ever recorded occurred in India on December 1st, 2014, with a staggering voltage of 1.3 billion volts. The energy generated by this thunderstorm was comparable to that of a large nuclear reactor, highlighting the immense power of such natural phenomena. The storm's voltage was not just a single lightning bolt, but represented the entire electric field generated by the thunderstorm. With Pokemon Ultra Sun and Moon being released in 2017, it would work as one of the potential sources of inspiration for Xurkitree's home world. Dark skies, violent storms, and a world that was hit with a solar flare that changed everything. All just for Xurkitree to take advantage of the shifting climate by climbing high upon the mountains, which is why we still see these large rock structures in their world. They had to climb up to continue gaining power, and as they did, they could reproduce and grow in size and quantity until eventually one is so massive it is impossible to truly understand its full size as we stand upon it. It would then become the dominant species, and with the understanding that a number of electric Pokemon, including Pikachu and Zapdos, can induce thunderstorms and be fueled by thunderstorms in return, then it was only a matter of time before Xurkitree would take over the planet completely. It's a bit terrifying when we look at their world through artwork as well, seeing massive Xurkitree in the distance walking around and knowing each one of those little white flowers are just more and more of their kind. That flora does not exist anymore. Though there's one additional detail that could secure this idea between the electromagnetic storm and solar flare that would have been a part of all of this, and that is Xurkitree's Japanese name, Denjumoku, which can be broken down for Denki for electricity, Denji for electromagnetism, and Jumoku for tree, because it stands like a Christmas tree with a little topper. So, you know, there's that. I guess there's one positive thing about this creepy creature that is really cool, admittedly. But before we move on to our next beast, this does lead me to something that I haven't mentioned yet, which is that one of the original inspirations for Ultra Beasts as a whole is that they are meant to be invasive species. The other confirmed inspiration is that they were created from looking at old scrapped Pokemon designs that never made it into the games. And before we do actually continue, I just want to say thank you so much for watching. If you're enjoying this so far, please do subscribe. Let me know what your favorite Ultra Beast is. I will tell you mine later when we get to it. Trust me, I will geek out at least a little bit. In addition, commenting, liking the video, and hyping the video helps the reach of the video, which helps the channel immensely. And if you'd like to go the extra mile, you can become a member of the channel for as little as $3 a month. It helps the channel immensely, and you also get stuff out of it, such as early access to videos, behind the scenes updates, and of course, members exclusive videos The next one is going to be me ranking all the, I almost said Team Rocket, all of the different evil teams in Pokemon and why some of them really deserve more attention than the ones that do get all the attention. But once again, thank you, and on with the video. Let's get the last Ultra Beast without a shown planet out of the way with Stakataka. The most interesting part of this Pokemon is that it isn't inherently destructive, and I imagine it to work incredibly similarly to Dugtrio or Magnemite, as every single block of its body is shown to be a living creature that came together to form Stakataka, who is then composed of 150 parts. As such, I kind of imagine them to start out as a single block, maybe form a wall, and then become this massive form. But what we need to look at is the habits that it has of placing something inside of itself and then crushing it. In addition, they do camouflage themselves with other walls as best they can. Despite them being described as a brutish Pokemon by the Pokédex, they were docile enough to listen to Ash and want to be returned home. Further than this, they shake and move whenever something is on top of it because it hates having something on it, but if you can resist this shaking, then you gain its respect. Kind of makes me think of a wild horse in video games, which then makes me think of this as a house moving castle situation. While it may have other inspirations, such as the Mokumokuren, the ties we have here are already very telling, especially as it is also seen as a counterpart to Blacephalon thanks to their stats, and both appearing in Pony Grove in opposite versions of the Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon games. As such, it might just be safe to say that much like the many artificial Pokemon that exist, these were created by some form of intelligent life to serve as a living creature to keep people out of their creators' homes or even castles, maybe even working as a false castle to then trap people and, crush them. If we go by the artwork, then it seems like they're making their homes in an overgrown area with some stonework that they could fit right in with. Just imagine that though, an entire castle of these things. Ultimately, this just likely means it's another planet that can support intelligent life beyond just the Ultra Beast that we see, and could have a full ecosystem we are currently unaware of. Not a lot to go on here with Stakataka, unfortunately. While we see a planet for Celesteela, it's not the planet that they belong to, which makes things a little weird to figure out exactly how Necrozma caused the creation of this Ultra Beast and on the planet, but we're going to try and theorize it anyway because it's fun. From what we do see, they currently grow an Ultra Crater, but there has been one instance of a Celesteela appearing within Alola, being discovered as a baby, and then growing up to then return home. The Ultra Crater is a large, expansive world with several craters filled with a green substance. The land has what looks to be metal pipes growing as roots throughout the rock, most likely from the many Celesteela that have planted themselves there. These would effectively be their fuel lines, potentially, that they might have left behind. A few red monoliths stick out of the ground as several geysers are also present shooting out steam. Several Celesteela are frequently present in the ground as the world is frequented by earthquakes due to Celesteela launching themselves out of the ground and into the sky. A large mountainous terrain is pictured in the background, and finally the sky is actively yellow due to the geothermal activity from the geysers and the Celesteela. This is a steel flying type that grows like bamboo, which the reason why it has the typing is because of bamboo's amazing sturdiness and overall resilience. In addition, they're effectively a space shuttle, which it makes clear to us thanks to the layers it has and the literal rocket arms that it has. The questions we need to answer to determine how it was created was through understanding why it leaves its home, which will tell us how it was created and the state of its home planet by Necrozma's actions. We'll actually run on the assumption that Celesteela is truly supposed to be going back to the moon. This isn't just because it seems to be flying towards the moon as shown through the anime, but also because it is very much inspired by Princess Kaguya, otherwise known as the Bamboo Princess, who was revealed by a bamboo cutter when he was, as you guessed it, cutting bamboo. Even in that story, we would eventually learn that the civilization on the moon is emotionless. They may be advanced, but there are no connections between people and nature. There are no connections to the living things. There are no positive emotions like joy, but there are no negative ones either. It's just a moot world. This could then play into another reason why we have a steel flying Pokemon. No grass type, no connection to nature, and then the steel typing also representing the coldness of the moon without emotion, without heart. Here on Earth, we find everything else. We find nature, we find emotion, and the planets that we go to within the Ultra Crater must have been the same.
that maybe, just like Kaguya, they too, the Celesteela, wished to escape the cold world of the moon that they existed on, and were momentarily banished down to a world much like ours. If this is the case, then we can simply chalk this up as another Earth and another moon being created in tandem with each other due to Necrozma's actions. The question we have to follow up with is simply how its light continues to affect this planet that Celesteela visits. For starters, we actually need to look at the composition of the water and the ground. The green water may actually be caused by high concentrations of dissolved minerals, primarily sulfur and iron, and with red rocks being here, it must mean that it has a high iron content, which matches perfectly. This is something we would see in places such as craters near volcanoes, which means this could be caused by acidic volcanic gases mixing into the water to then make it green. There is then the chance that this planet may be something else entirely. It may be a place for Celesteela to descend and fuel itself up, only to then return home. This place isn't it being banished, it's effectively their century-long daycare and gas station. Now you might be asking, what if Celesteela made the planet this way, but I strongly believe this is not the case, since we don't see this type of damage in Alola. In addition, sulfur is something that can be used as fuel, so this planet may have actually been greatly affected by volcanic eruptions long before Celesteela came around, though it definitely is making things a little bit worse. So how does this become a common occurrence, especially since we really don't see any volcanoes? Well, our clue is by looking at the geysers that are here. They are producing something from deep within the earth, and we just might need to look at Yellowstone in specific to break this down even further. Yellowstone geysers erupt due to a combination of intense underground heat, abundant water, and specialized subterranean plumbing that allows pressure to build until water explosively escapes. The looping chambers trap steam from hot water, escaped bubbles from trapped steam heat the water column to a boiling point, and when the pressure from the trapped steam builds enough, it blasts, releasing the pressure. As the entire water column boils out of the ground, more than half of the volume is this steam. The eruption stops when the water cools below the boiling point. This is all because of the Yellowstone caldera, also known as the Yellowstone Plateau volcanic field, which is a significant volcanic system located beneath Yellowstone National Park. It is driven by the Yellowstone hotspot and includes multiple calderas, lava domes, and other volcanic features. And if Yellowstone were to have a full super eruption, it is estimated that the areas closest to the caldera, including parts of Wyoming, Montana, and Idaho, would experience pyroclastic flows, fast-moving avalanches of superheated gas, ash, and rock fragments traveling at hundreds of kilometers an hour, capable of incinerating everything in their path and making survival impossible within the blast zone. The ash may also cause the sky to look red or orange, and even without that, then we get the geysers adding in pollutants to the air, which absolutely could make the sky yellow. So, very long story short, if we assume that all of Ultra Crater is like this, then the planet itself is just in a constant state of eruption, which is entirely plausible because of not only natural occurrences, but also due to the impactful influence of Celesteela. And in theory, all it would take is for the place to sustain water and then get struck by one of the many different massive shards of Necrozma slamming into the planet like a meteor. Just like the meteor that kickstarted the end of the dinosaurs. But instead of setting off a massive volcano, maybe it just set off these geysers, and that was the start. That was all that it needed for Celesteela to become attracted and then start to replay this cycle of eruptions over and over and over again. Highly speculative and theory crafting, but it makes the most, scientifically speaking, I'd say. Our next visit is arguably one of the most peaceful and safest places of all if you yourself are a kind and peaceful person, as we visit Kartana in its home of the Ultra Forest. The landscape of this world is that of large expanding forests with trees sprouting flowers resembling the world's ultra beast, Kartana. The leaves on the floor are rectangular yellow origami paper, and the ground appears to be sandy, resembling a Japanese rock garden. At the end of the area is a large rock where Kartana can be fought. This is just reminiscent of the idea that once you can split a massive boulder with your sword, it is a testament to not only the sharpness of your blade, but also the skill of the swordsman. And of course, right before the fight actually begins, Kartana comes out and slices the boulder.
It also seems that the world is habitable to humans as well as Pokemon, most likely due to the atmosphere created by the lush greenery that does exist here. I will say it's a bit weird that we don't find white paper here at all, likely meaning that the trees themselves might get cut down when they die and then be processed into paper. I would even be willing to bet that since Kartana puts such an emphasis on having a sharp body, it might be cutting the stumps razor thin in order to make the necessary pieces for more Kartana to be born or to be created. Maybe even the Kartenvoids are doing this. This would also make sense as to why, despite Kartana is an incredibly sharp and dangerous creature, that it is still highly susceptible to water and fire, no different than any other piece of paper. Luckily, they are a grass steel type, so they're only actually allergic to fire, while being very resistant to water, at least by the game's mechanics. Despite this, in their world, the Kartana here are not kept in Pokeballs, but do fight alongside the human-like individuals previously stated as Kartenvoids, and they are noted to speak in a Kendo-like language. In addition, Kartana are peaceful creatures that do not attack others of their own volition, according to one of their dex entries. Now, there's one detail we don't see quite as well in the games, but we can make out much better in the official artwork, and it's that the trees look similar to bonsai trees. It would make perfect sense for them to be bonsai as well, considering the zen nature of this world. Though what kind of tree they exactly are is the hard part, since bonsai is more about the art of keeping the tree small more than it is a specific tree. A traditional tree is apparently the juniper tree, amongst over 100 others, just to put that into perspective. I got really into bonsai for a while, or I tried to get into it, and unfortunately, I believe mine got shock, and it ended up dying within like 2 weeks, and of course I didn't know that it died until, it wasn't absorbing water or doing anything else. With this in mind, with the sand and rockiness of it, we can assume that even if it does rain more often, it will then be drained away with the soil, making sure nothing stays too moist. With enough rocks in the area and tree coverage, there's plenty of safe space for Kartana to hide away, and I'd say it's fast enough and small enough that it could probably dodge rain when necessary. I also almost described this planet as being an inch closer to the sun to then be drier overall to make it a safer space, but that's not how planets work. And once again, there's probably way more than just this exact forest and more than just these quote-unquote humans in the greater world of Ultra Forest. Though we don't see any of it, and arguably this was the easiest to explain of all of these dimensions, just because it just feels very typical of our world. Up next, we find the very interesting case of Pheromosa within the Ultra Desert. The Ultra Desert is a vast desert landscape filled with turquoise crystals and flowing sand. There are several rocky structures and monoliths scattered around the landscape, as well as to what appears to be small clusters of shrubs. There are several large boulders that require a Machamp shove to move around, including one giant chunk of a cliff larger than any found in Alola. There is also some rocky terrain that the Mudsdale Gallop is required to pass through. Now, this seems like an incredibly empty place, but there are, as always, some key details in our Ultra Beast and the environment itself that will give us everything we need. For example, Pheromosa is noted to be thin, supple, and not only is it fast enough to dodge lightning while running at incredible speeds of 120 miles per hour or 200 kilometers an hour in an instant, it is also able to release a powerful pheromone that is meant to match its beauty. These are not just random ideas and random traits. These are adaptations that come together cohesively that Pheromosa had to develop in order to become the creature that it is. All because it lives in a hot, vast desert that has very few smells, very little food, we do have bushes here, and an incredible number of not rain-bearing storms, but pure lightning storms. When we look at the many structures within the desert, it immediately makes me think of fulgurite. Fulgurites, also known as fossilized lightning, are formed when lightning strikes sand or soil, creating glassy tubes or branches. These tubes can be filled with various materials, including crystals, depending on the composition of the material struck by the lightning. For example, a quasi-crystal has been found in fulgurite, indicating that there are instances where crystals can be incorporated into fulgurite formations, and this is what we see in Pheromosa's world. In addition, these strong pheromones have to be either warning other creatures or attracting others of its kind. It might even be trying to attract a mate that we aren't currently aware of. though we could always look to its counterpart as a possibility. I strongly believe that just like Blacephalon and Stakataka may exist in different parts of the same world, we might even see the same with Pheromosa and Buzzwole amongst other creatures we haven't been made aware of yet. Despite going through these ultra wormholes and these wormholes being light years away, we don't know where they dump us. We don't know the greater world, we only see a section of it. For all we know, all the ultra beasts could exist on this same exact planet, with some exception of course. All of this would actually maybe even give us a very large case of rain shadowing. Effectively, there's a real-life occurrence that is really well explained by the site Treehugger. Rain shadows form when air moves from west to east across mountain ranges, which act as barriers to the flow of air. When winds blow against a mountain, they have nowhere to go except be forced to ascend its sloping terrain. As air hikes up the mountain slope, it expands and cools adiabatically. That's a new word, adiabatically. Dry air typically cools by 5.5 degrees Fahrenheit for every 1,000 feet it rises. If a mountain's elevation is high enough, the air cools to its dew point temperature, at which point it reaches saturation and holds as much water vapor as it can. If the air is lifted beyond this point, its water vapor will begin condensing, forming cloud droplets and eventually precipitation, so it'll start raining. The now moist air also continues cooling, but at a rate of 3.3 degrees every 1,000 feet. When the air is lifted over a topographic barrier, it's called orographic lift. If the air that reaches the mountaintop is cooler than the surrounding air already at the summit, it will sink down the leeward side of the mountain, and as it descends, it compresses and heats adiabatically. By now, there isn't much moisture remaining in the air, so very little precipitation falls on the east side of the mountain's crest. By the time the air reaches the base of the mountain, it can be many degrees warmer than it was originally. It can also move more swiftly because gravity pulls on the air mass as it travels thousands of feet downhill. According to AccuWeather, a 40 to 50 mile per hour wind along a mountain ridge can increase to 100 miles per hour by the time it reaches the mountain valleys. This phenomenon is known as a Chinook or a phone wind. The taller the mountain range, the more pronounced its rain shadow effect will be. And that way, it was an incredibly long way of telling you that it will rain on one side, possibly creating a beautiful and lush forest, while the other side could be entirely barren and devoid of the same foliage due to it not getting the same amount of rain, potentially even going as far as creating a savanna or desert-like environment. And since there are bushes, even though we don't really see a tree, we could say that it might be a savanna in some capacity. And I strongly believe either way that this is what we get with a world that Pheromosa and Buzzwole live on. Two Pokemon that are also in separate versions of the games have a tag team card together, which looks pretty dope, both sharing the same typing, bug, fighting, and both being stereotypes of male and female body depictions in anime. Actually, who am I kidding? Pheromosa would need to have a huge treasure trove on her pectorals in order to fit the anime stereotype. Buzzwole is already perfectly built like All Might, so there's nothing to add in there. Now, I tried to find an interaction between them, but it turns out that they never actually interacted in the anime, unless I just cannot find it, and the terminal montage clip has just taken over my brain permanently, making me think that it was based on full-on actual lore that was established within the games or anime, and it wasn't. Either way, this would then make more sense to consider not only Pheromosa and Buzzwole living on the same world, but multiple other creatures as well that Pheromosa would attack, some other species it could attract with pheromones, and then of course Buzzwole's whole gimmick we'll get to soon enough. Unless, once again, going back, there is a male Pheromosa out there, or maybe Pheromosa is the male and there's a female out there. Either way, I think you get it. I feel like I've also become a bit of a broken record saying how these worlds are theoretically just like ours, but ramped up to 10 in certain areas. Imagine if Haina Desert just got taken over by Pheromosa. If it could breed, then we'd have a mass takeover and they could potentially cause the soil to erode further thanks to their habits and increase the size of the desert habitat. Also, the desert would seem incredibly clean due to the sheer amount of heat and the sand itself, so that definitely plays into not only the white coloration of Pheromosa, who would reflect the sun while probably avoiding it, and then of course seeing things as unclean outside of the desert when in our world.
As a last note to explain the white reflection better, because you'd expect a darker pigmentation due to the sheer amount of sunlight, but nope! Apparently there are insects out there that work exactly in this manner, such as the Siphochilus beetle, I'm not going to redo that word, who reflects sunlight using ultra-white light-scattering chitin filaments, making them among the brightest white objects in nature. These beetles use a dense random network of filaments to maximize reflection with minimal material, and they're often seen as pests, so they fit our mold pretty well for the part of Pheromosa's inspiration, especially since Pheromosa seems to have that hair that seems just to be a little bit see-through in some capacity, or at least really thin. Time for my favorite ultra beast, the swollest mosquito this side of the Mississippi, living in the ultra jungle Buzzwole. The ultra jungle is a large expansive jungle containing both regular trees as well as several larger spiraling trees in the shape of muscular beings flexing their upper torso and arms. These larger trees are either freestanding or connected with vines that the player is able to walk across. A river also winds between the connected trees, and there is an active smoking volcano in the center of the map, which tends to erupt and can summon Buzzwole as a clear blue sky passes overhead. When we look at the official art, the trees are even more absurd, being in multiple poses, and it's so goofy that I love it. I also noticed the area is more than just a volcano. It's got some range and depth to it. There are mountains in the area which make perfect sense, as they would then feed into the winding river that exists here. We might even expect there to be some strong marshy areas because of this, but something is missing here. Running water is not a great place for mosquitoes to lay eggs, so if we really want it to be more realistic, we would see a slower moving river. So either Buzzwole doesn't care about that because it's an ultra beast and doesn't have to care about that, or it lives in some unknown section here, which may just be closer to the volcano, considering the eruption of Buzzwole that happens there. And then of course, I have to prove myself wrong, because Buzzwole is likely inspired by the Asian tiger mosquito, which is not only invasive, but is also able to breed in not only less than 30 milliliters or 1 fluid ounce of water, but is also able to breed within running water unlike other mosquitoes, making this whole area a habitat that in fact does make sense for Buzzwole. Now, Buzzwole's whole thing is to absorb life energy from its victims and whatever else it wants using its harder than diamond proboscis, and then that energy gets turned into bulging muscles that are stronger than steel. We could make the claim then that we have a Viltrumite situation and the Buzzwole are just eating each other, leaving only the strongest behind, but then that would mean that they have nobody to show off their muscles to, and that's just unacceptable. You have to flex for somebody. So once more, I make the claim that not only are they on an opposite mountainside to Pheromosa within the same world, but that they must have other creatures being used as prey within their home world. It's what would make the most sense. This place would then of course have an incredible amount of rainfall, but thanks to the volcano constantly going off, it seems like the Buzzwole have something to train against, because you know they aren't just going to run away from some molten rock even though they really should. Plus, the volcano then provides renewal for a forest that likely has few to no other creatures to have a complete ecosystem here, so something has to happen. I might even bet that Buzzwole's constant muscular gallivanting might be inducing the eruptions, that they might just be strong enough to do something ridiculous like cause seismic activity, which, I mean, they are able to learn Earthquake, but only by TM, so that's a bit of a null point. Apparently, instead, their last move that they learn is Focus Punch for some reason, almost like a well-aged Buzzwole finally learns how to... wait. Focus Punch takes 2 turns to hit, which means that on turn 1, it's just posing for its opponent before then actually punching. God, I love this Pokemon. Still need a video all about move lists and how they tell a story, because that's beautiful. Now, we're already on the last one, and we're ending on the one I always end on when talking about the Ultra Beasts, arguably the scariest parasite in all of Pokemon, as we have Nihilego within the Ultra Deep Sea. In the games, Ultra Deep Sea is a dark world with many caves that include several colorful rocks in the shape of flora on the walls that resemble diamonds. The area that the player arrives in contains a small pathway that the player can navigate through. Nihilego can be actively seen traveling through the area.
There is also a small rocky platform in the middle of the area that the player can sit on to attract the local Nihilego. No thank you, not interested. I don't want them to latch onto my head and inject me full of their neurotoxins, although Evil Acrylic would be pretty funny to see, or detrimental, I guess, because it's not that Nihilego changes your thoughts, it just releases your inhibitions, meaning that Evil Acrylic would likely cause some incredible damage for the sake of nature and the ecosystem. Like, we're talking Team Galactic and Volo levels, if I would be allowed to. Back on track though, Ultra Deep Space within the anime seems to be a little bit different and seems to be a collection of large crystals floating around in space as the Nihilego float around. This doesn't go against what we see in the games, but potentially gives us an even better understanding of the space here, especially as we do see more in the manga that lines up with the worlds. What is even more interesting is that within the manga, it turns out our main characters of Sun and Moon spent an entire 6 months in this space, only surviving because their bodies eventually no longer needed food and no longer got sick while they were in the world. We could try explaining this in a number of different ways, but it almost feels to me like it's like exposure therapy to energy. Like some form of radiation exists in this area that got them sick at first, but would eventually fuel and sustain the people and Pokemon or Ultra Beasts here.
We actually get to see something like this in the Sun and Moon anime with Shiinotic and Morlul as they end up taking life energy from Ash and the gang, but when they do so, they just effectively empty their stomach, making them hungry. The way to fix it is to then have them eat. And I'm going to make a strong claim here, and it all relates back to the idea that Necrozma had shattered into crystals, uncountable to the human mind, and maybe one of those crystals did end up here. Some of the most massive ones. In fact, I am willing to claim that crystals must have landed in each of the environments of our Ultra Beasts, as it would make the most sense that when Necrozma opens up wormholes, it wasn't trying to summon Ultra Beasts, it was trying to make a path for all of its pieces to come back to it. And this is why we get to see it in its full Ultra form back in Ultra Megalopolis, without seeing it fuse to another legendary Pokemon. We have the other legendary Pokemon when we face Ultra Necrozma. We also know that nobody else is going to fuel Necrozma back to its full form, and to our knowledge, it doesn't take the light from any other universes in this time. Every single wormhole that opens up is just another place where its shattered remains landed, and all it wanted was for them to return to it, for it to restore itself. We know these crystals fuel the many Ultra Beasts. We know that they and the light of Necrozma are what fuels Alola, and so I think it's a fair theory to claim that Ultra Deep Sea never had all these different crystalline structures, that it was just another empty space devoid of light, then producing a slew of white jellyfish. But here's the problem. That still doesn't explain one other detail, which is not only why they spawned into existence, which we just don't get that answer with real animals sometimes, but also why are they parasites? To explain, Nihilego function by attaching to a host, injecting neurotoxins, and then their victim proceeds to produce negative emotions more and more. These emotions are then transformed into positive feelings of euphoria that then encourage the individual to effectively do whatever they want, as much as they no longer feel guilt. There are no negative feelings, and whenever there are some, those feelings get chemically transformed into positive feelings, which is horrifying. Further than this, the inhibitions released are physical as well for the infected, giving the host even more power and abilities overall as they reach their absolute maximum potential. And all while Nihilego feeds on these intense feelings of worry and anxiety, which also explains why Lusamine was the perfect victim after her husband disappeared. To make matters even worse, if it loves the victim in terms of being a host, that it sees them as the perfect prey and it doesn't want to let go, it can fuse properly with the host and never let them go, as it transforms itself and them physically into something far more powerful and terrifying while taking complete control. This would be terrible to see on a god Pokemon or any other Ultra Beast, but at least it can be undone through knocking it out effectively. But again, these are adaptations that had to have existed due to theoretical evolution, not Pokemon evolution. So who would it be a parasite to? Well, I think this just wraps full circle and comes back to the idea that people in Ultra Megalopolis are the prey of this Pokemon. Or at least they were in an era long ago. And even if not them, then a whole other dimension similar to how Poipoles once existed and has seemingly fallen to permanent ruin within the timeline of games may have held human beings in that right. After all, it seems a little too perfect that Nihilego would become attached emotionally and be able to physically, parasitically attach to humans so easily, as if it was a natural adaptation. Luckily, if we do apply manga logic, then it seems as though the energy within the world, which I claim comes from a shard of Necrozma, sustains the many lives that exist here, and they survive without having to predate upon others. The only strange thing then is the diamond-like structures and all the crystalline fragments inside of their caves and all the coral-like structures we see there, and to that I have no genuine answer. I mean, look, this is a fantasy world, and even my hypothetical theoretical science can only go so far to explain this. It's almost like a geode in its own right, and any other explanation just kind of falls moot without me just saying, yeah, that's the Pokemon world for ya. It do be magical and mystical and full of wonder. So maybe you'll have an explanation that I couldn't think of, and if you do, you should let me know in the comments. The same goes for any other ideas you have, anything you can support with evidence that goes against or coincides with my ideas, as I am one person and I can't do it all, and I love reading the comments. Plus, they help boost the reach of the video alongside likes and hyping the video. If you're new and enjoyed, please do subscribe because I have more content than what a human being could possibly consume, even if they watched for a week straight without sleeping, and they're all deep dives just like this. If you enjoyed this so much that you would like to go the extra mile, become a member for as little as $3 a month, and you get behind the scenes info, early access to videos, and members exclusive videos like my personal journey through Pokemon, and the soon to come ranking of all evil organizations, which I'm pretty excited for. Lastly, the best comment gets highlighted every week, and in the past week, or at least between the last video and this one, the best one was this multi-paragraph comment from Daedalus that I will not read here, but gives an incredible amount of evidence that talks about Golurk and its construction and the history that goes against and supports my theories within the Mega Golurk video, and I loved it. It even ties it to Magearna, which shocked me that I just completely forgot about comparing Golurk to Magearna, and I'm a little disappointed in myself, but oh well. Not every comment has to be this long as well. Some can be funny and short, and they get me just as good. But with that then, as always, thank you so much for watching. Don't do anything I wouldn't do. Don't do anything I would do. Please be nice to each other. I love you, and I'll see you next time. Bye! My throat is completely thrashed. I need to go drink tea.